I will hand over to Matthew.
Thank you, Holly. And morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining. As Holly's alluded to, I'm a risk consultant within Zurich. Been here for sort of 8-9 years or so now, working exclusively almost across the public sector and working significantly with organisations such as yourselves across the third sector organisations. And delighted to be here and share some thoughts, share some ideas, share some examples. Today, hopefully, is about practically giving you opportunities to recognize and respond to some of those financial risks that do threaten your own charity's sustainability. That's, regardless of whether you're a small community group or indeed a national organization, actually the principles remain the same. And it's about how we build that resilience collectively through foresight, through future decision making. And so that's what we want to try and get to today. It's there's lots within financial management that and are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and I don't intend to sort of teach you to suck eggs, as it were. But by way of an introduction, sort of an overview on the next slide, we've got. I've sort of pulled together a bit of a this is what we know. This is what you know as much as anything. There are unpredictable, they're challenging times, as it says. This perfect storm, there's falling funding costs, there's various changes that are going on, and you are managing those and you're dealing with those. And as it says on there, there are significant pressures within the public sector regardless, and charities are often the ones left picking up the sort of the delivery, and you by extension then feel the strain, feel the face of that increased competition for each pound that is spent. And there's a bit that we've taken out of the NCVO's documentation from earlier on this year around that financial year is going to be a squeeze for many, and the risk that it poses could be high. But equally, I think it does create opportunities for us and the potential for innovation. I think it's financial sustainability in such an uncertain funding environment is something that is and should be of incredibly high importance. And naturally, there's alignments into things like risk registers, and I'll come on to some of those in a little bit. I have got a couple of live polls that we'll put up later on and during the session, just to build some interaction and get some of your own thoughts. This is a great opportunity to share ideas. We've got a good number of people on the call today. You'll all be having your own experiences and you'll all be sharing them. So please don't be afraid or don't be shy about sharing some of those opportunities and some of those areas. And as I alluded to at the start, I want to try and make this, to give some practicality to it. And hopefully by the end of the session, we can start to think about actually, you're going to be able to start recognizing key financial sustainability risks, assessing your own and monitoring your own financial health. Looking at what tools and techniques are there, as Holly alluded to, those sort of 4 or 5 key areas. And then I'm going to finish off with a couple of case studies of examples that we've seen in recent times of how organizations have perhaps embraced their own challenges, but taken the opportunities that presents with it. So without further ado, I'm going to move us on and just sort of create this baseline of actually what is it referred to and what do we mean when we talk about what is this financial sustainability. For me, if I sort of take those 3 points at the top, where I've seen organizations that I would regard as being a sound, sustainable organization, I think that those 3 points then apply to those organizations. So sustainable charities are ones that can meet all of their current obligations. They can plan and adapt for those future changes, challenges, adaptations that might be coming. And ultimately, they continue to deliver what it is that they're looking to deliver throughout that change. For me, financial sustainability is not about building the biggest reserves that you've got and building them, and creating that sort of Scrooge McDuck characterization of the big pot of gold in the cellar. actually it's about ensuring that we can continue to keep delivering the work that we're trying to deliver, serving our beneficiaries as the environment that we're operating in shifts and changes. And as it says at the bottom, we don't need to be wealthy to be sustainable. We just need to be aware, proactive, and adaptable. And a lot of when I sort of work from a risk management point of view in a risk management context, that awareness and proactivity is always what we're striving to build into organizations, and allowing them to flex and to adapt. And that is what is resilience is all about, is recognizing that those changes and those external influences in many cases may be impacting on us, but what is our strength and where our resilience areas lies. And we're going to come on to a couple more of those points. So sorry, Holly, if you can move me on a slide, please. So I mentioned, so this might be the bit that is telling us what we already know, but I think it is important, and again, sort of building it on that context of what do we mean by financial sustainability. Here are, I think, some fairly common areas that we're seeing of challenges presenting themselves, and it may well be within your organisations. You look at those on the screen that you think, oh yeah, we've either had that and we've got through it, or maybe you're dealing with it, or maybe it's one that has started cropping up within your own mind and your own conversations with colleagues. Picking up on a couple of them. So, operational costs. We're seeing inflation impacting across many organizations. Things are costing more than what they used to cost. You align that into sort of, if we say post-COVID, I don't know if we can ever say post-COVID, but it certainly from what it was in 2021, we've shifted a long way. But we've had changes during that time. People's donations are reducing across, as a generalization. I mentioned earlier the increasing demand that we're seeing on organizations such as yourselves and the services that you provide, partly in response to wider public sector challenges and changes and shifts in delivery models that are taking place. So that rising demand, rising operational costs, I think is really key, and all of that comes at some sort of pounds, shillings, and pence. Reserves, many reserves we've seen have been rightly built up, and then during COVID times when everything was changing and everything was operating in a slightly different way, many of those reserves were getting reduced and depleted in certain areas, and that possibly gives us that opportunity, or lack of opportunity going forwards, to weather future unexpected changes or events or drops in income that may come along. What else have we got on there that I'll perhaps pick out? Competitions, again, a bit of an interesting one. We are seeing a growing number of organizations that are competing for the same funds, the same attention. So how do we as individual organizations make sure that we continue to stand out and get our own message heard, and to be one that resonates with the demographic, with the market in which we're trying to engage with and trying to talk to? We've again, and I'll come to some of the examples later on, but we are seeing some organisations that are starting to attract new donors from new sort of demographic areas and new age bracket areas that perhaps historically was not one that they've been able to engage, but because they've shifted their own way of engaging with that community, and digital transformation comes into some of that, how we embrace new technology and new systems that give us additional skills to reach out and get our messages out there. So like I say, we're all feeling some of these, either potentially more than one maybe at the moment, or maybe ones that you can resonate with in the past, and we're feeling them in different ways. And it's why understanding your own financial risks is incredibly important. I often I do a lot of work whereby we look at risk registers, and one of the questions I'm often presented with is, oh, we're a charity of X size, or we're whatever organization, can you come in and tell us what my risks are? The honest answer is, you already know them. I can come and help tease them out for you, but because you're a national charity doesn't mean you're going to have the same risks as another national charity. There will always be subtle changes, subtle differences. So I'm gonna come on to hopefully the first poll of the morning, and Chanel, am I going to help that you've, yes, perfect. So I would love you to, taking this sort of question in front of you. So, which of the challenges are most affecting your charity right now? And I've put down 4 examples and given an opportunity for another one as an other. And as I say, please share it in the chat. But just welcome you having a couple of minutes or so, just have a look at those and then share them and just see what the results throws out with. Right, how are we getting on? Yeah, difficult to choose just one. I agree with you, Karen. It's there's lots that we're sort of feeling and going through. And as I said earlier on, I think a lot of those all resonate, and they're all sort of dealing with and choosing at the very same things at the same time. And how we're managing those is increasingly complex. Well, Paul, compliance. Thank you for picking that one out. And it's I've got a little bit around sort of compliance roles of trustees and just the burden that some of the regulatory changes and pressures are bringing on. So that's really useful. Appreciate that. Okay, so looking at some of the responses that have come through, a good spread, I think, is fairly obvious and expected, and I appreciate that. Income volatility coming through across a vast majority of responses, 37%. Cost increases, I think has been alluded to, and we've touched on within the chat. It's not surprising to see that spread being quite even, and Karen, I think it was yourself, wasn't it, that pointed it difficult to choose one. It is a challenge, and it's something that creates this conversation point for us going forwards. Okay, so Holly, can you skip me on a couple of slides, because I think the next one is just up the poll question. So yes, so how do we go about assessing our own financial health within our organization? And this is hopefully where I start to try and start giving out some tools, some hints, some tips, some future techniques. For me, we need to recognize that we've got some key indicators, some key metrics that our charities should have that enable us to track and monitor our own financial health over a time. So things like our income diversity, our reserves level, liquidity ratio, they allow us to have those dashboards and have that information available to us. How we then go about monitoring our own income and our expenditure. Are we seeing trends? Is the assumption that costs are increasing and getting more expensive? Is that assumption right? Are we seeing that come to us in real times? And how then is that helping future forecasting? And making sure that those financial reports are legible, they're understandable, people are engaging with them. And I mean that right through the organization, from trustees to board, senior leaders, and colleagues as well, existing officers within organizations, etc. We need all parties to have some sort of sight of it. We don't need to give necessarily all of the income, all of the information all of the time, but being able to present that rounded base will allow us to help future proof the organization and keep on top of those regular monitoring, which comes back to, actually this is something that we can probably practically already do. We have this information now, and it allows us to come. What I've then done on the next slide is started to build in some of what I think perhaps some of the early warning signs. So where we've got these tools in place, what are the red flags that we want to be picking up? And Holly, apologies if you move us on, please. So I've got things like operating in a deficit. Are we seeing that come through in our organization? Are we seeing regular instances where we're starting to our expenditure is outburdening our income and we're burning into some of the reserves? And picking a couple of others on there, and I'm not going to run through them all, but are we persistently having late payments, or are we increasing our own sort of liabilities and the costs associated to that? Have we got over reliance on, I've put one funder, but a small number of incomes, and does that in turn increase the potential for the burden and the impact of that funder being unable to sort of meet, or if they disappear out of the market. I probably could have picked on a few others in terms of, the impact of fixed costs and how they're increasing, contracts and how they're sort of changing and impacting on the organization. If we can build these warning signs into those previously sort of talked about dashboards, the reports that go through, we're starting to encourage and build in really positive risk management processes and ensure that risk becomes proactive. I often do work around risk, and it's so regularly regarded as being the sort of the afterthought. And when it's all gone bad and people then come knocking on the risk manager's door to say, well, why wasn't this on the risk register? And actually, when you boil down to it, you find a risk register that's become quite bland and quite generic. And so it sort of says everything without saying anything at any one time. We want to encourage our risks on registers to be very pointed and very targeted. And actually, if we have got an unclear cash flow picture, that needs to be on the risk register, not just grouped under financial risk and sort of everything and anything comes under that one umbrella. I think the thing with these red flags is they may be something that starts out quite small and very much manageable, but they can grow really quickly if they're not addressed. And we need to encourage that self-awareness, that reflection, but also recognize positives, because many of you as leaders within your organizations, you're likely to have had your charity experienced one or more of these and bounced back from them, and created action plans and developed and delivered future ways of working. And so they're not showstoppers. They're not things that are going to change the way that we work and possibly drag us under and things like that. Actually, if done in the right way, there's opportunities aligned to all of these things, and it's how we spot them early enough and make sure that we have that conversation. So how do we go about trying to build some of the sort of financial resilience that we've got within these within our own organization? Now, some of these ideas may be ones you're already exploring. There may be things that aren't an option for you. And so if it's not an option, okay, well, which ones are, and how do we possibly bring some of those into our areas? I think it's important that we don't have to do all of these at once. It's, how do we start small? How do we build one or two of these into a future way of our working? And indeed, ensure that that's having a positive impact. Make sure that we test that it is working. The assumptions that we might have, how do we make sure that we build in some degree of recognizing and testing those assumptions? For example, if we want to try and start diversifying income streams, we might start branching out on an area that we're already delivering in, whether I don't know, say it's children's services, and we're providing some care to individuals. What are the other elements that go with that care that actually we might start be able to work? Can we start trading with local schools and building in a network in that area and bringing in some income? But don't suddenly start opening your books to all schools within the local area, because that might be just too big, too courageous almost at once. Let's work in partnership with a small number of very local schools, and then cross those hurdles that naturally come with those new relationships, and then build in through that. I think across all of these practical approaches, one of the things that I think is really powerful and really vital for any leadership team is thinking about scenario planning, and it aligns very much into risk management areas. It's more often seen when it comes to things like business continuity and emergency planning. So you might have had exercises in the past where, hypothetically, if we lose the building or if we lose the network, what do we do? How do we go about it? But think of scenario planning in the context of a risk area, and start to think, okay, if we start to create opportunities or new contracts with new providers, what does that mean for existing service provision? Have we got the staffing skills? Have we got the awareness? And how do we go around making sure that that we test our plans and our ideas within a safe space before we perhaps go about rolling some of them out and building that network across our own organization. So again, I think it's a really powerful tool, really powerful technique. It isn't an exact science. You can't use it to fully predict the future, but it can help you to prepare. And what I'd always advocate is that, whilst we're here to look at those opportunities and those positives, the scenario planning absolutely needs to have that element of, okay, but what if this goes wrong? What's the impact there? What would be the changes, and how would we recognize those potential impacts for us? Within this, I think the role of leaders, role of governance is really key. And forgive me, it's moved on the chat, but somebody mentioned earlier on around sort of the governance structure, the regulatory elements. And I think having a strong governance and stakeholder communication remains absolutely key in any organization. And I'm sure it's something that you've already got, and you'll have very, very strong links in with your own sort of trustees and levels that they operate in. But we need to encourage that. Our trustees are not expected to be financial experts all of the time, but they do need to understand what their roles, responsibilities are, and how that they can pick those up. And in turn, our own staffing and our own training policies, procedures, they're often something that is sort of taken a little bit of back burner, particularly when it comes to finances, because finances are strapped, and so can we afford to send staff on various cases and training courses? But actually, we need to encourage that we're consistently supporting our staff in their own broadening of knowledge, and indeed those skills that they bring back into the organisation, particularly in this instance when we're talking about things like financial literacy, and making sure that we've got the right people with the right skill set to cooperate around it. And then one that perhaps isn't on there explicitly, but linked into the scenario planning, is around horizon scanning. Giving yourselves the time, particularly as a leadership team, to sit down and think, well, okay, what's the vision of the organization that we've got, that's well documented, that's probably on websites for your own organizations and in policies, procedures, etc. Taking that vision and starting to think, well, what do we know about the market and the wider picture that could be future risks that may impact on the delivery of that vision, and why do we think they're going to impact on it? And within Zurich, we often we would say, horizon scanning will always be challenging the further you get away from present day. Once you get beyond 5, 6, 7, even up to 10 years time, it's really difficult to understand what the market, what the world will look like in that time. But that doesn't mean that your own gut feels, your own thoughts, your own conversations that you might be having with peer organizations aren't something that can be documented. And very often they're not risks that have got a tangible element that we can articulate on a risk register. But but within a horizon scanning template, they can be done, and we tend to use a sort of concentric circle type model. I can share an example via NCVO after this event that just simplistically looks at the center of the circle being present day, and the further out from that center is where the timescales go, and you can break them up into different segments. The most common is utilizing the PESTLE analysis, which again I'm sure many of you are very familiar with when it comes to looking at risks. So there's some sort of practical elements. I talked earlier on, and I alluded to sort of the role of leadership and the role of governance, and this sort of, I suppose, emphasizes or reiterates that role. As I say, trustees are not expected to be financial experts, but they do need to engage. They do need to ask questions, and they certainly need to understand the basics. And part of that comes from making sure that we've got clear roles, responsibilities, we've defined and we communicate those specific financial oversight duties out to our trustees and indeed senior leaders, and ensuring that responsibilities are included within role descriptions and indeed induction materials if trustees change or new senior leaders come into the organization. Making sure that our board fully understands the financial risks that are there. I alluded earlier on, one of my personal pet hates when I see risk registers are ones that are incredibly generic and our finances are a risk. well, why? Tell me what it is about the finances that are a risk. Is it the income? Is it the expenditure? Is it something else? Is it training costs? What is it? We need to understand, because once we understand that root cause, that's when we can start applying some tangible actions that, again, we can monitor and we can start to have an impact. If we just said, well, finances are a risk, my personal argument would be, well, I could come back in 5-10 years time and you will still have that as a risk, because it is something that when you're dependent on bringing in that money, whether it's from donors, whether it's grant funding, and the timescales associated to grant funding could be could be significant, and they often don't align with the actual need and the delivery of a piece of work. And making sure that we're documenting the key element and the key root cause of the risk is really quite key, and that allows the board to understand what it is that we are carrying. And then a couple of others on there. So, leaders, making sure that finances do link in to the strategy and delivery. I did some work recently with another organisation, a public sector organisation, and they were, gentlemen that I was talking to come in and come from a budget planning meeting, and we were having a subsequent chat around risk. But I asked him the question of, I said, actually, while you're in your budget planning meeting, did you look at your risk register? And he said, do you know what? We never did. I said, well, that means that the two departments, the two elements of that work are not quite joined up, because the finances and the budget planning that you're going through should have some alignment into the risks that you're looking to manage, and how we build up that future strategy and ensure that delivery is appropriate. The finances need to talk to what it is that we're ultimately managing and ultimately picking up. And then that sort of last one around the sort of challenge and the scrutiny, I think they are essentially, it links in perhaps to that scenario planning earlier on. But how we build our dashboards up and make simple briefing packs, but those simple briefing packs allow people to understand it, to ask the questions, to probe, and ensure that we have this open discussion, this culture where everyone in the organisation, whether they're trustee, whether they're board level, officers within the organisation, they're comfortable asking questions, and they're comfortable challenging assumptions, and having that sort of open Q&A, almost scheduling dedicated time to actually talk about finance and risk within meetings I think is really key for us. So I've got a second poll that Chanel, I think you're going to kindly throw up for me, that just asks how confident you are in your trustees in their understanding. It's worded better on the screen. How confident are you in your trustees in understanding your financial risk? So very somewhat, not confident, not sure. And don't worry, this isn't a test that we come back to you on. It's just a gut feel that you might have at the moment. And like I said, I welcome people's thoughts and welcome people's ideas. Whilst you're all sort of answering those questions, I'll sort of waffle on a little bit more in terms of thinking about how we'd go about ensuring that we've got training available to our trustees and indeed their roles, their responsibilities. I see so many organisations that have got this sort of trustee level role, and it's often a bit of a tick box. It's often a bit of a nodding through. I think there's some great ones out there, and I'm really hopeful, and I'm sure many of you on the call have got great examples where your trustees are really, really supportive, really understanding, really knowledgeable, and they're great. Zoe, sorry, I just picked up that comment. Your trustees being risk averse, and that leads to frustration. And I think that's a really valid point. And we're straying into sort of risk appetite, risk culture areas at that point, and that might be. And I don't know whether you've got risk appetite statements within your own organisation, but that's something that could be a future consideration for you, and bringing trustees in to understand where we think risk, at what point is too risky, and making sure that we have that conversation is really is a fascinating discussion. And we've all got, collectively on this call, we will all have a different perception as to what is too risky, and making sure that we have that conversation between ourselves to then create a consistent area is going to be really quite key. So yeah, somewhat confident. Over 50% of people of those of you that responded were somewhat confident in your trustees, which I think there's some real positives there, because that has, you know, a degree of conversation and a degree of opportunity to have that conversation. But equally, it's they could be better. They could understand a little bit more. And if that's the case, then, you know, going back to my, well, what train? How do we help those individuals to be even more confident in having that conversation? And Paul, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Trustees having those different skill sets, you know, it's positive and negative. And as I said at the start, and sort of caveated it hopefully with, we don't expect trustees to be financial experts. Actually, if we just employed and just brought in financial experts as trustees, then we're missing so many other potential avenues that we would like them to have knowledge of, foresight of. But yeah, certainly in the context of this, they'd be useful. So some practical tools. I've talked a lot about risk registers at the moment. It's my world. It's what I see so often, and so I'm going to, you know, continue to bang the drum for it. But making sure perhaps that your risk register, like I said, you know, doesn't just have umbrella risk, doesn't just say, oh, staffing is a risk, budgets are a risk, finance, whatever it is. I want to understand why. Ask yourself why. If you're looking at the content and saying, do you know what, that one sentence just isn't giving me enough, I need more of a description here. And then we can understand what the consequences are. You could even have a separate line for financial consequences and start to build in that financial focus that it's shown on the screen in brackets there. Having a look at your cash flow forecasting tools. Well, do you have one? And that isn't a panel question, but, you know, do you have one? And if we do already have one, is it providing the information that we need to? Does it build in the reserves tracker that's shown on the screen? How do we then create this dashboard into senior management to give that oversight and to give that transparency? And also think about the guidance that is available. You know, NCVO, and I'm sure Chanel and Holly will be able to point in the direction of information that is out there, that's available via the NCVO as membership through them, and indeed from the Charity Commission, that helps support the conversation. Most things when it comes to risk management is not about making the prettiest risk register. It's about having the conversation and having the discussion. And what we want is opportunities that facilitate that conversation by providing some level of detail that then allows that review and that challenge and that conversation going forward. So I'm conscious of time. I've got a couple more slides and then we'll open up the wider Q&A, and you know, by all means continue to throw some in there. I wanted to just share a couple of common pitfalls that I've seen, that I've been witness to, that I've been involved in, and then I'll share some some case studies, and then we'll go to the QA. So talked a little bit around this single funding source, you know, depending heavily on a grant or a single small number of donors or income streams, that can understandably create some vulnerabilities if that support were to end, were to change, were to drop. So how do we avoid that? Well, can we diversify? Can we increase our income sources, whether they're new grants, new funding models, trading activities, new partnerships, etc., etc.? And you know, just I'll pick up a couple of the others. So, you know, reserves. So if we, you know, inadequate reserves, if we're not building up potential unrestricted reserves, and that could leave us exposed in the event of, you know, significant change and emergency, you know, whatever it might be, COVID part 2. Let's hope not. Let's touch wood. But how do we then avoid that? Well, let's develop a new reserves policy. Let's, you know, set targets. Let's monitor the building up of that reserves pot, and create as our you know, proverbial safety net, rainy day fund. I remember in COVID talking to a charity and they referred to it as, you know, we've done good management, we have built up a rainy day fund. The problem is it's now throwing it down, and it has been for the last months, 2 months, etc. And that is creating problems whereby that reserves was being depleted faster than it could be built up. The sort of 3 points that are showing on the bottom there, I think, will support the review of those and hopefully minimize the impact of those common pitfalls that are shown. So having that strong governance, having really key voices and really strong tones from the top. that allows a proactive approach. We don't want to be here waiting for the bad news to come and then having to react. If we can start to think about it, I've alluded to things like horizon scanning, scenario planning. They allow us to proactively think about what we could do. And that in turn drives this willingness to change, to adapt, to learn. And that goes back to the very early points of the resilience that we're trying to build into organizations allows us to flex and to adapt. So my next slide is just, I've thrown up some real world examples, some case studies. I won't use any names here, but I'll very quickly sort of launch through certainly two of them, might be able to touch on the third one as well if I talk fast enough. So the top one there, so this was a children's charity, and they, through reducing income, they, I suppose, took the opportunity, took the idea, and they launched themselves as a social enterprise. They started selling educational resources out to schools, out to parents directly. They actually also were able to further develop corporate partnerships and expand on their own existing program. And what they found within 2 years, their non-grant income grew from 20% up to over 50% of their total revenue. That in turn created a very financial stable base for them to go and seek future investments. So, a really good example of how utilizing what it is that you're doing and being able to build on that and create future income revenues was good. The second one, so the digital fundraising. So during COVID, like many organizations, this particular charity experienced a really significant drop in in-person donations. They were able to utilize online campaigns. So they pivoted the way that they're working. They created these online campaigns, virtual events, digital donations platforms, various other things. And to support that, they recognized staff skills needed to be improved. So they provided training and engagement into staff to work on things like social media. They found that their digital income increased 30% in the first year. And they also attracted a new, younger donation base of individuals. So I think, a bit of a takeaway from that is how, digital tools can be really supportive and they can be very engaging if they're used in the right way. And we've got to have the right skills to be able to harness it and develop it and make sure that we're hitting the right audiences. And I think I've talked quick enough to cover off case study 3 as well. So this was a charity group that were delivering similar instances or similar work with a number of other local charities in the area, and they created this sort of collaboration and a bit of a consortium, if you like, where they shared back office services. So they sort of pooled HR, IT, and finance across 2 or 3, I think it was 3 organizations initially. That reduced individual charity overheads by 20%. It freed up funds into other frontline projects, but it also provided opportunities that strengthen relationships between those organizations. And it led to future joint funding applications on behalf of all of the organizations because they were suddenly sharing ideas and sharing resources. I think all of those examples show that with some degree of proactive conversation, proactive strategies, we can build that future sustainability and continue to deliver the vital services that we are seeking to deliver. My final slide just has a few key takeaways, and then I'm going to open it up to Q&A, and I'm going to have a drink as well. So Holly, just if you jump us on to the next slide, just as a quick sort of final point, and then so yeah, here we go. 5 points. Understanding what your risks are and how they're articulated and documented within risk registers, tracking those early warning red flags, and utilizing those red flags to plan in for different futures, different events, scenario planning, horizon scanning, etc., etc. And then, last couple, engaging your trustees, engaging your staff. Where we can, use simple tools. Don't complicate it for the sake of complicating it. Actually, the simpler it is, the more easier it is to build this sort of collective buy-in, and that allows these effective tools to be the simple ones. Right, I've rattled through a lot of that. That's a lot of content, as we say. We'll share it, but yeah, Chanel, Holly, over to you guys for QA. I'll be honest.
Thanks. So that's just so brilliant. Thank you so much, Matthew. We'll give Matthew a quick breather before we move to the Q&A portion of the webinar. Just a quick reminder, if you've got questions, pop them in the Q&A feature and we'll get to them. But I just wanted to briefly remind you that NCVO is a membership body. It's great to see so many of our members here today. And I can also see that there's many of you who are not yet members, and I would really like to change that. Our community is made up of 17,000 voluntary organisations of all shapes, all sizes, and all missions in every county of England. They represent the depth and the diversity of community action that makes a huge impact on civil society. We're really proud that 90% of our members are small organisations and that we can offer the very smallest of them free membership. So that could be you as well. With membership, you'll get tools and resources that will save you time and money. But most importantly, when you join us, your voice is added to ours. We work together to improve conditions for volunteering. And together we make a difference. We couldn't do any of the stuff that we do here at NCVO without the contribution of our members, including amazing free webinars like this. So if you're not in yet, let's change that, because I reckon that we need each other. So email the team today. The email address is here on screen. We'll also pop it in the chat, and ask the team about your options for NCVO membership. Let's then go to the Q&A. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen, I think, so that we can see Matthew's face. Let's see, did that work? Did I stop sharing? Not yet. There we go. Let's have a look at some of the questions that we've got for you, Matthew. We'll start with Ruth from Eat Club. Ruth says, we find it very difficult to track our reserves. Our accountants do that for us once a year, but what is a simple reserves tracker? How can we keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening with our reserves, Matthew?
Well, yeah. I always knew this is always the danger of opening Q&As. You get tricky questions coming in. Ruth, honest answer is I don't think there's any sort of set definitive answer. Going back to I would make it as simple as you possibly can. So and leaning on sort of risk management methodology. But can we have a simple red, amber, green tracker of something whereby, I don't know, a simple operating, so understanding what are our unrestricted reserves, and what is our, if we almost divide that by our annual operating expenditure. And then if that is, creating a dashboard of, okay, within, if those funds are, I don't know, not to a month or up to a month or 2 months, maybe you might say that they're red, and we'll put those at risk. If we've then got it, say 2 to 4 months, we might put that as amber, and 4 to 6 months or something like that. You might say, actually, we've got quite a healthy buffer there. We're quite content with it. I suppose the aim of that is it's showing how long the charity can continue to operate if that income stream did stop and did change. I suppose you could look at it in different ways. If you've got a significant income provider, so a large single income source, how much of that is as a percentage against your total income? So if that is, say, over 60% of your total income is in one single source, you might then say, do you know what, that's a really high risk. And how do we try and make sure that our reserves tracker is building up to create as a buffer against some of those areas? So there's probably some key points, and it might be easier. I'll do a bit of an proper answer. I would strongly encourage you to keep it simple. Perhaps work with your accountants and say, what information could we perhaps look at on a really regular basis, say monthly, 2 monthly, whatever it might be for existing team board meetings that you might have, that just allow you to keep a bit of a track on where your reserves are and how they're moving and fluctuating throughout the year.
Excellent. Thank you, Matthew. Next question is from Karen. This is a really interesting question, actually. Karen says, I support a number of CICs with fundraising, but often it spills into finance and risk. I'm used to looking at charity commission and fundraising regulator codes, but what should I be looking for or looking at for CICs in particular? Is there something different that you would recommend, Matthew?
Um, no, is the honest answer. The principles and the practicalities of it, I think, remain the same, regardless of where you are. There'll be some subtle differences for a community interest organisation, um, but I think at the heart, the principles that we would look to sort of apply and look to implement would be consistent across the board. So if you're already reaching out to the likes of the Charity Commission and those other areas that you mentioned, actually, yeah, bringing those into a CIC is fine. The point of it often develops into a conversation around finance and risk. I can understand that the two naturally do overlap, and I suppose there's positives to that from a risk point of view, making sure that we are articulating the right thing as a risk and not just those umbrella terms, as I say, that have become my pet hate over years of seeing generic type risks that come into it. But yes, there are, as you know, there are subtle differences, but from a risk finance type point of view, actually the practicalities remain very similar.
Mhm. And Karen has also asked, and I have seen a few questions as well in the chat, about templates to kind of apply the learning here. When we looked at the slide that was practical tools that can help, there was a few questions about, are there templates that can help us to set up these things? The good news for everyone is that when you're an NCVO member, Zurich has helped us to create some of these templates and tools exclusively for members. So join membership, and we will link to all of those resources in the follow-up email that we'll send out to you all. And then Sam from West Northumberland Food Bank has asked about the financial ratio. Could you explain a little bit more about the financial ratio?
Yeah, so and I suppose this a little bit links into one of the earlier questions. So for me, your financial ratios give as a dashboard um, can give whoever's reading it, so trustees, leadership teams, etc., ultimately a clear view of what the organisation's financial health is, without having to dig through and trawl through significant pages of reports, etc. So, and again, perhaps linking into the reserves question earlier on, but having two or three key points that are done as a rag rating, so I mean the income one's a really good one. Take, what is your largest income source, divide that by your total income, and then having that as a red, amber, green status is that large income over 50% of what our total income is, and therefore they are a significant stakeholder that we need to ensure that we manage, that we understand, that we keep hold of. And it also perhaps highlights a need for future diversification to try and reduce that significant reliance on one area. Other examples, so operating margin. So what's our total income minus our total expenditure, and then how do we then sort of, well, what's our surplus? What's in the reserves? And again, just a simple red, amber, green. They allow a very easy focus and draw people's attentions in within a dashboard. There's data that supports it. There's reams of data, and our accountants will provide as much data as we wish when it comes to it. But in terms of those ratios, and again, I'll drop. I think there's four of them that we tend to use. I'll drop the four of them in as a response, and Chanel will, I'm sure, kindly circulate it around, just as ideas that can be used. But I would say flex it to your own organisation. Use your own gut feel as to what feels appropriate, and adapt it and tweak it. But yeah, it's about how do we take that quite tedious finance information. Forgive me for those of you that are on the call that are finance bods and love looking at numbers. But how do we turn that information into something that everybody can understand quite clearly? And I say that as a risk person who does exactly the same from a risk point of view. How do we turn those risk registers that are tedious and boring and pages of information into actually, here are our ones that we're really concerned about. Here are risks that are trending in the wrong direction. And how do we make that management information useful to managers to help support the decision making that we're wanting to make, that's proactive and supportive, etc.
Which is, I suppose, about collective responsibility as well.
Yes.
I have some more questions for you, Matthew, that have come through anonymously. For any trustees that could be on the call, what should trustees be asking or reviewing regularly to ensure good financial governance? Especially if, like we've been talking about, it's not necessarily their wheelhouse, but they want to be proactive. What's your tip for them?
my tip would be embrace your curiosity. Everyone has a degree of I don't quite understand this. And if you don't, if there's a bit you see and you don't quite understand either how those numbers have made up or how that risk is articulated, then don't feel shy about sitting there and saying, I don't quite understand this. Can someone just give me a little bit more information? As a trustee, ultimately, as I said earlier on, you're not expected to be experts in everything, but you need a degree of assurance that what is being presented to you feels right and feels appropriate. And as I said, take it in a risk context. We all have a different perception as to what is risky. Holly, you and I could probably find something where we'd have a debate where I would say this is too risky and you would say no, I'm quite happy with it. And it's about making sure that that conversation comes around whereby we can both see each other's point of view. And from a trustee that has presented some financial information, if everyone around the table is saying, yeah, we're happy with this, we're quite comfortable, we understand those numbers, and you are sat there thinking, actually, either I don't understand it or actually that feels a bit too risky, don't be afraid to be the devil's advocate, to actually say, I need a bit more clarity or I need a bit more assurance that this information is as comfortable as what everyone else is buying into. Because it is so easy after the event, and we see it, gosh, look at the news on any probably given day, and there'll be examples of whereby somebody at some point goes, yeah, at the time it was reported, I wasn't quite sure on this, but I let it go. Groupthink mentality is the worst thing when it comes to sort of trustee board type conversations, where we all buy into one or two dominant people who all agree and understand it, and therefore it diminishes the voice sometimes.
Mhm.
So as trustees, you have a voice, you have an equal voice. Don't be afraid to use it and embrace that curiosity. And again, I think I've got some like simple sort of questions that you can have, and I can share those with Chanel as like an aid memoir that as trustees you could have a sort of half dozen questions in your mind of does this make sense? Right,
Mhm.
yes, okay. If I can get answers to all those, then I'm comfortable.
Amazing. That would be super helpful. And we can include that in the follow-up as well with
Yeah.
all of our friends here today. One final question. We know that the majority of NCVO members and also the majority of charities, voluntary organizations out there are small and grassroots sized. What are some practical first steps for organizations that size? What can they do to improve their financial resilience?
It's everything has to be proportional. I'm not here to create an industry out of risk or out of finances. So going back to that sort of final, or one of the final points around keeping it simple. So we should, good practice would be that we have some degree of understanding as to what our finances are. Simplistically, what's our income, what's our expenditure, and where have we got pinch points, where have we got areas of concern. And again, let's use a simple red, amber, green, and that can be a gut feel that starts with a senior leadership team, a leader potentially in a small local charity organization. It could be one or two people. I would always encourage that there's at least two involved, because you need that diversity of thought and co-challenge. And same from a risk registering. Holly, you've already alluded to the templates that are available via NCVO. They're really good templates, and I think they're adaptable for small organizations. They don't go into chapter and verse. When we're doing risk workshops, I often sort of will start off with posing the question of what are the things that could stop you doing what you're trying to do? And it because people, if you start mentioning the word risk, people get very excited or nervous. But actually, at the core, everyone knows what it is that they're really concerned about over the next 12 months or so. And those are the things that you want to pull out. They're the areas really that are risky to us. There could be huge things that, how do we document X, Y, or Z? But actually, at its core, it's focusing on those really simplistic areas. And so I absolutely would encourage that you keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it focused and targeted, that allow you then to use it as a tool rather than, and I've seen loads of examples where it's the eye rolling subject, it's the dry subject that no one wants to do, and it's a Friday afternoon and we've had long weeks, long days, and then let's have a look at the finance plan, or let's have a look at the risk register, and everyone's eyes just start already thinking to, what am I doing this weekend, rather than if we can create something that's a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more involving, you get interest from people, you get the conversation.
Amazing. Great. Well, thank you so much, Matthew. I'm going to just share my screen again. Hopefully everyone can see that. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us today. I just have a few final thoughts before you all leave us, but we're really grateful that you've been able to join us. We're really grateful to Matthew and to Zurich. They are excellent insurance and risk experts, and they offer a fixed package for organisations that have an income under £300,000. It's definitely something that you should check out. The cover there includes £5 million public liability, including cover for volunteers, and it also covers public accident for up to £10 million. Employer's liability. The QR code on your screen will take you to further information about how Zurich can help support your organisation. And again, we'll also include that in the follow-up email that Chanel will send to you later this week. In our final minute together, any second now, a snap poll will appear on your screen for your initial feedback on today's webinar. If you have the time, we would also love to hear from you in a short feedback survey that will appear in your browser when you leave this webinar. And we would just be really grateful to hear from you. Massive thanks again to Matthew and to all of you for your participation, and hope you have a great rest of the day. And we'll see you next time.